Okay, let's read chapter 11, Bridge to Terebithia. So remember at the end of chapter 10, they said that your girlfriend's dead, and Mama thought you were dead too. So it's kind of sad. Chapter 11, it's called No. Something whirled around inside Jess's head. He opened his mouth, but it was dry and no words came out. He jerked his head from one face to the next for someone to help him. Finally, his father spoke, his rough hand stroking his wife's hair. They found the Burke girl this morning down in the creek. No, he said, finding his voice. Leslie wouldn't drown. She could swim really good. That old rope you kids have been swinging on broke. They think she must have hit her head on something when she fell. No, he shook his head. No. I'm really sorry, boy, his dad said. No, Jess was yelling now. I don't believe you. You're lying to me. He looked around again wildly for someone to agree, but they all had their heads down except Maybelle, whose eyes were wide with terror. But, Leslie, what if you die? No, he said straight at Maybelle. It's a lie. Leslie's not dead. He turned around and ran out the door, letting the screen bang sharply against the house. He ran down the gravel to the main road and started running west from Michigan and Millsburg to the old Perkins place. An approaching car beeped and swerved and beeped again, but he hardly noticed. Leslie, dead, girlfriend, rope, broke, fell, you. The words exploded in his head like corn against the side of a popper. God, dead, you, Leslie, you dead? He ran until he was stumbling, but he kept on, afraid to stop, knowing somehow that running was the only thing that he could keep Leslie from being dead. It was up to him. He had to keep going. Behind him came the noise of the pickup, but he couldn't turn around. He tried to run faster, but his father passed him and stopped the pickup just ahead, then jumped out and ran back. He picked Jess up in his arms as though he were a baby, and for the first few seconds Jesse kicked and struggled against his strong arms. Then Jess gave himself over to the numbness that was buzzing in his head. He leaned his weight on the door of the pickup and let his head thud against the window. His father drove stiffly without speaking, and once he cleared his throat as though he were going to say something, but he glanced at Jess and closed his mouth. When they pulled up at his house, his father sat quietly, and Jess could feel the man's uncertainty, so he opened the door and got out. With the numbness flooding through him, he went in and lay down on his bed. He was awake, jerked suddenly into consciousness in the black stillness of the house. He sat up stiff and shivering, although he was fully dressed from his windbreaker down to his sneakers. He could hear the breathing of the little girls in the next bed, strangely loud and uneven in the quiet. Some dream must have awakened him, but he couldn't remember it. He could only remember the mood of dread it had brought with it. Through the curtainless window he could see the lopsided moon and hundreds of stars. It came into his mind that someone had told him that Leslie was dead, but he knew now that that had been part of the dreadful dream. Leslie could not die any more than he himself could die, but the words turned over uneasily in his mind like leaves stirred up by a cold wind. If he got up now and went down to the old Perkins place and knocked on the door, Leslie would open it, P.T. jumping at her heels like a star around the moon. It was a beautiful night. Perhaps they could run over the hill and go to Terebithia. They had never been there in the dark, but there was enough moon for them to find their way and apologize. It was so dumb for him not to ask if Leslie could go to the museum, and then he and Leslie, Miss Edmonds, would have had a wonderful day. Different, of course, from the day he and Miss Edmonds had, but still good, still perfect. Miss Edmonds and Leslie liked each other a lot. It would have been fun to have Leslie along. I'm really sorry, Leslie. He took off his jacket and sneakers and crawled under the covers. It was dumb that I didn't think to ask you to come. It's okay, Leslie would say. I've been to Washington and to the museum 1,000 times. Did you ever see the buffalo hunt? Somehow it was one thing in all of Washington that Leslie had never seen. So he could tell her all about it, describing the tiny beasts hurtling to destruction. His stomach felt suddenly cold. It had something to do with the buffalo, the falling, with death, with the reason he had not remembered to ask Leslie to go with them to Washington. You know something weird? What? Leslie would ask. I was scared to come to Terebithia this morning. The coldness threatened to spread up from his stomach. He turned over and lay on it. Perhaps it would be better not to think about Leslie right now. He would go to see her first thing in the morning and explain everything. He could explain better in the daytime. He put his mind to remembering the day in Washington, working on the details of the pictures and the statues, dredging up the sound of Miss Edmund's voice, recalling his own exact words and her answers. Occasionally, into the corner of his mind would come a sensation of falling, but he pulled that away. Tomorrow he would share it all with Leslie. The next thing he was aware of was the sun streaming through the window. The little girl's bed was only rumpled covers, and there was movement and quiet talking from the kitchen. Lord, poor Miss Bessie, he'd forgotten all about her last night, and now it must be late. He felt for his sneakers and shoved on his shoes. His mother looked up quickly from the stove at the sound of him. Her face was set for one question. The coldness began to sink back. I forgot Miss Bessie. It's okay, your daddy's milking her. I forgot last night, too. It's okay, your daddy did it for you. But it wasn't an accusation. You want some breakfast? Maybe that's why his stomach felt so cold. He hadn't had anything to eat since ice cream with Miss Edmonds. The girls were watching TV, and they turned to look at him. He sat back down on the bench. His mother put a plateful of pancakes in front of him. He doused them with syrup and began to eat. They tasted marvelous. Don't you even care? Do you? Brenda was watching him. He looked at her, puzzled, his mouth full. If Jimmy Dix died, I wouldn't be able to eat. The coldness curled up inside him and flopped over. Will you shut your mouth, Brenda Ahrens? His mother sprang forward. Well, Mama, he's just sitting there eating pancakes like nothing happened. I'd be crying my eyes out. Ellie was looking at Mrs. Ahrens and then at Brenda. Boys aren't supposed to cry at all times like this, are they, Mama? Well, it doesn't seem right for him to be sitting there eating just like that. I'm telling you, Brenda, if you don't be quiet. He could hear them talking, but they were farther away than the memory of the dream. He ate and chewed and swallowed, and when his mother put 3 more pancakes on his plate, he ate them too. His father came in with the milk. He poured it carefully into the empty jug and put it in the refrigerator. When he washed his hands at the sink, he came to the table. He passed by Jess and put his hand on the boy's shoulder. He wasn't angry about the milking. Jess was only dimly aware that his parents were looking at each other and then at him. Mrs. Ahrens gave Brenda a hard look and gave Mr. Ahrens a look, which was to say that Brenda was to keep quiet. But Jess was only thinking of how good the pancakes had been and hoping his mother would put down some more. He knew somehow that he shouldn't ask for more, but he was disappointed when she didn't give him any. He thought that he should get up and leave the table, but he wasn't sure where he was supposed to go or what he was supposed to do. Your mother and I thought you ought to go down to the neighbors and pay respects. His father cleared his throat. I think it would be fitting for you to come too. He stopped, seeing you are the only one that really know the little girl. Jesse tried to understand what his father was saying. What little girl? He mumbled, knowing it was the wrong thing to ask. Ellie and Brenda both gasped. His father leaned down the table and put his big hand on the top of Jesse's head. His wife gave him a quick, troubled look, but she just stood there, her eyes full of pain, saying nothing. Your friend Leslie's dead, Jesse. You need to understand that. Jesse slid his hand out from under his father's. He got up from the table. I know it's not an easy thing. Jess could hear his father speaking as he went into the bedroom. He came out with his windbreaker. You ready to go now? His father got up quickly, and Mother took off the apron and patted her hair. Maybelle said, I want to go. I never seen a dead person before. No. Maybelle sat down as though being slapped by her mother. We don't even know where she's laid out, Maybelle, Miss Ahrens said more gently.